So I am freaking stoked about this. Tomorrow we've got the Howsound Crest Trail. I'm here with Mark motherfucking Suski. So Mark and I have been training for nearly 3 years. Coming August.
3 years, yeah.
August, dude. Holy shit. So I found Mark through Functional Patterns originally, and I was traveling, I was volunteering on a horse ranch. I was riding horses, I was chasing horse girls. It was a whole lot of fun, and my body was all busted up. And yeah, I think we'll probably put some before and afters of my running and my gait cycle and everything.
For sure.
And we've just really approached training in a specific style rather than, doing things that don't really transfer across into what I'm doing in regular life or what most people are doing in regular life. Mm-hmm. And so, with our sort of extreme fast hiking trail running that we're doing, and it's been an incredible journey to be not only pain-free, but to be performing at a completely different level than I ever thought was possible. So
hell yeah, man.
Yeah, I'm hoping today you can just explain a little bit about how, I guess, we've designed my training program, not just like restructuring my body properly and realigning it properly, but retensioning it, and how this fits into not only what I'm doing in day-to-day life, but like how it's helped me become a better athlete.
Right.
Because I've improved at an incredible rate for endurance and how much faster I can go, and the type of hikes that we're doing. I'm surprised even at myself of being like, holy shit, how can I get this good this quickly? And I'd love for you to explain how is that possible? What have we done that's sort of that's cheated the path?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first and foremost, kind of like what you were touching on initially, we're addressing asymmetries in the body, really, right? So I'm looking for imbalances in your body that you inherently have, and imbalances typically lead to inefficient motion, right? So if you address an imbalance or an asymmetry, you're almost guaranteed to increase efficiency first and foremost, right? And it's almost, people think that some of these small, like rudimentary movements that don't feel like are doing much in a corrective sense actually end up having the biggest impact, because the corrective exercise is actually what creates the foundation for you to go through those explosive motions and create the mass, the endurance, and the cardiovascular output around that symmetrical foundation, right? So really what we were initially looking to do was to create that symmetry, and then we're looking at making it more sport specific, right? So what type of ranges of motion, what type of tension are you going to find yourself in most likely when you're going through these types of hikes? And where is kind of the failure point? Where's the breaking point? And what do you tend to favor? And how can we kind of alter tension in a way so you're going to the path of least resistance, but it's offering you the most output, right? And that's really where the sport specificity becomes quite important, right? If you're just trying to work solely on posture or just on gait, that's one thing. You can make your training specific to that. But if you're trying to improve endurance, improve deep ranges of motion that you'd find yourself in dynamically when you're trying to climb a mountain, that's a whole other thing, right? Because now you're going off of asymmetrical forces on the ground, and your body has to dynamically react to that, right? So that's why we'll tend to utilize different tools that are going to put your body into those different types of unstable states, so that way we have created the baseline for your body to operate from when it faces that in the real world.
Okay. And then can you expand on the path of least resistance? So does the body want to do that naturally?
Yeah, so the body typically wants to go through the path of least resistance. I think humans in general, we want to do things that are easy, and our body is very much the same way. But just because our body is going through the path of least resistance doesn't necessarily mean it's the most efficient for us, right? So you can optimize for that, and that's really what we're trying to do within our training program, is teach your body where certain tensions need to align to allow it to understand and to communicate through not only the muscular network, but also through the nervous system, that this is the path of least resistance. And we got to kind of almost embed that into your body. So when things start to break down, it's still using that tunnel network, and it's not faltering to different places where you might find those asymmetries.
I mean, but how does that happen in the first place?
How does that happen?
Yeah, how does the path of least resistance start to become inefficient?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. So for a lot of people, unless we're innately genetically gifted, our body is going to operate from some type of asymmetry, high-level athletes included, right? So everyone is operating from their path of least resistance as to what their baseline is, right? So if I indoctrinate myself into athletics at a young age, my baseline for path of least resistance is going to be higher versus someone who was just dormant a good chunk of their life, right? Because I've now trained my body, all right, this is the baseline I need you to operate from. So really, it's created as a byproduct of the stimuli that we've induced on our body for the past 10, 20, 30 years, whatever that is. And the intent is to upgrade where that baseline is.
And then, like, why would someone listen to you and me? Because we're not the most jacked fucking dudes out there. But it's like... And I mean, like, you know, for most people, that's like what it comes down to. It's not about performance, it's about how I look, right? Mm-hmm. But then ultimately you start to explore more and you're like, actually, I give a shit about how I feel in my day-to-day. I feel less tension in my brain. I feel smarter. I can run faster. Actually, I'm beating everyone that I'm competing with. Like, this seems to make more and more sense.
Yep.
But there's, like, definitely a, you know, for me, when, you know, I used to be a lot bigger, you know, which pointlessly bigger. But it was hard to let go of that, you know, because I'm like, my ego was attached to that, and I'd go in the gym and I'd do half bodybuilding, half, you know, FP style movements, and then like gradually I had to like submit to just doing it all corrective and all functionally, and I had to let go of what I looked like in the mirror to my previous perception of what good looked like.
That's right.
So now my perception of what good looks like is completely different.
Exactly. Yeah.
So someone that has that perception of what good looks like is like, you know, super jacked, I look like a powerlifter.
Okay.
What would be the purpose in me letting go of that?
What would be the purpose in them letting go of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not here to, you know, tell people how to live their life and what looks good and what doesn't. At the end of the day,
I am.
At the end of the day, I think we're all going through our own subjective experience in this life, and I think that what has been put forth in terms of looks good, in my opinion, isn't necessarily what is going to look good 10, 20, 30 years from now, right? If I'm a power lifter, I may look good for 15 to 20 years, right? But how many power lifters or bodybuilders do you see who look really healthy into their 50s, 60s, and 70s, right? That's the question that I'm asking. And
without exogenous stimulation.
Yes. And also, like, as human beings, we're attracted to symmetry, right? When there's studies on this, when you look at someone's face, unconsciously, we're looking for symmetry. That's just what we're attracted to. Now, you can create symmetry through creating two big biceps that are equal to one another, for sure. But I'm looking at how can I create functional mass and symmetry that is going to allow me to perform at a high level into those later years in life. And that might be putting a little bit of brakes on, you know, that vanity in the interim right now. But over time, you can build functional mass. It just looks very different, right? Think of like a car.
My legs.
Yeah, your legs, right? And like, if you think of like UFC fighters, for example, right? People look at them and they're like, okay, they're jacked, but they look different, right? There's like just that subtle difference compared to a dude who's just like all out, I'm just a bodybuilder, right? So we're trying to create mass that is built on a foundation that is going to create sustainability for us later in life. And I think if we can start to look at things from a more functional and symmetrical standpoint in terms of putting on mass in an integrated way, not so much in an isolated fashion, then our perception of what looks good actually starts to shift, right? And I think it really does come down to the individual, right? Perceptively, what looks good to another person, what looks good to me, is always going to be a different thing, right? And everyone has their own taste of what they think looks good, what looks bad. And
we have this discussion all the time. Like with me and my mates, I'm like, I'm just not into white chicks.
Yeah.
It's just not my thing.
And I'm the same way, right? Like I feel you on that, you know? And it's one of those things for like what your preference is, for one. And I think we could go into a whole psychological and behavioral almost discussion just around this in of itself.
I talk about it every single weekend. I still can't figure it out.
Yeah, and it goes deep, man. I mean, At the end of the day, I can only provide what my subjective experience has brought me to in regards to that. And personally, I think feeling good, operating at a high level in terms of performance, and building mass around that is far more fitting for me, right? And that's what I want to prioritize. If other people want to make that a priority in their life, then I encourage them to do similar styles of training, right? But if you want to look like a bodybuilder, do bodybuilding, right? I'm not going to tell you to do something different. It just depends on where your values lie.
Totally. So if I just don't know, because I haven't experimented, what would be some of the benefits of switching up my training in that way?
What would be some of the benefits?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it depends on where a person is currently at. Right?
So I'm like, this looks. I'm curious. Like I've heard about people doing it. You know, I'm seeing some cool stuff online, like whatever. And then I'm like, why would I do this? Why would I give this a try? If I'm not in pain, but I'm like,
just
curious.
kind of
just
a bystander. You're like, like what's going on here?
Yeah.
Type thing. Yeah, I mean,
because it kind of makes sense when you talk about it. Like when I'm listening to you, you're like, that generally makes a lot of sense. So if it makes sense and I'm curious about it, why would I take that next step? What would I hope to expect from it?
Yeah, I think what a person can expect is to feel a sense of integration and almost like a holism within how their structure operates. So they would notice a difference in just how day-to-day motions feel within their body, whether that be opening a door, picking up their kid, reaching for a can on the top shelf, right? It's changing the way in which your body operates on a fundamental level, not just in one degree of motion, but in multiple degrees of motion. So I think a person, what they could expect most is just to feel more within their body, right? They would just genuinely feel more. They're like, wow, I like have muscles here I didn't even know that I had. And I can feel that muscle work with this other muscle in my body. Like, that's crazy. I didn't even know those two things could communicate with one another, right? So it allows people to understand how the body works as an entire integrated system through motion. And one thing never works without the other. And that's, I think, what people can expect if they were to get into this type of training.
Sweet. And then specifically with my training, like what guided you to do the movements that we did rather than sticking me under a barbell or doing weighted lunges and that sort of stuff?
For sure, yeah. Again, it comes back to what you're going to find yourself doing most, not only day to day, but also in the performance aspect that we were training for, right? So I'm looking at, what are the tensions that your body are going to be under, and how can I apply that tension in a relevant way and in an integrated way throughout the entire body. Now, it's not to say that, doing a squat, a barbell, back squat, or a deadlift or something isn't going to provide some benefit. It will, because your body is going to be under a compound load, and that is going to be replicable to what you may find when you go out and do something performance-based or even in day-to-day life. But I'm looking at how can we take that and stack more variables on top, because you're not just going to operate from one plane of motion. You're not just going to be moving up and down all the time, and your body isn't just this two bricks of stability all the time going up and down, right? It's a three-dimensional piece that works in all sorts of different spiral type fashions. And the reason why we would not use those things is because it doesn't fully replicate the type of stimuli that you're going to find yourself under most commonly. There's a principle that is really quite common in the fitness industry, which is the SAID principle, and it's specific adaptation to imposed demands. And it's a highly relevant principle, but one that I think may go overlooked, because people think that they can just piece one compound movement with a functional movement, we'll say, right? They're like, okay, I'll do my barbell squat, but then I'll go and do something rotational. But it's looking at how does the relationship of the tension that your body is under in a deep squat relate to you coming out into a rotational movement, right? Not just going up and down and then working just that one phase of motion. It's combining those two elements, not working them as separate entities. Those two things need to synergize.
Because in real life, I'm not going from a squat and then turn like up to a different rock, and then I rotate and then step onto a different rock. I'm doing a full rotation out of a deep squat. Or if I'm going down a mountain, I'm like landing in a deep lunge or with a rotation as well.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
Cool. So, and then let's take the movement piece out of it, and let's just talk about doing hard things. Like,
love it.
How? Because a lot of people, like, we struggle, right, as a society, to do the thing that we know we need to do because it's difficult, and we, as human beings, go towards the path of least resistance. So, what advice would you have to someone that's kind of stuck down the path of least resistance, and they know they need to do the thing that has more resistance?
For sure. Well, I think first and foremost, it's important to recognize resistance, because a lot of people, they think that something is hard because it's hard, and it's just like, well, it's hard for me, so I'm not going to do it, right? So they don't even recognize that first and foremost they're facing resistance in their life. So I think understanding that resistance is just a natural part of our life, and it's something that's imperative to everyone's life, I think is the first step. I think the second step is to look within yourself and try to get a full, higher level view of what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Because you can't really start facing resistance if you don't even know where it is that you're going, right? So resistance isn't inevitable, but first we gotta at least have a direction, right? So if you wanna, say, experiment with something like this, or you're going for a master's degree, or whatever it is in your life, you're trying to start a business, I think having the end goal in mind is important to start with. And then when that resistance arises, don't look at that as a failure or a stopping point, but rather as a teacher or a lesson. Because in that resistance lies this education for you that is going to allow you to propel through life from those experiences. And I think the more that you can become aware, comfortable, and then execute on what it is that you're trying to achieve, the less resistance is going to not necessarily hold you back, but it won't carry so much weight on you when you face it. And yeah, I think that'd probably be the advice that I would give. It's something that I face on a daily basis. I think lots of people deal with it. And for me, probably one of the biggest things that I have found has helped is really looking at that as a teacher. And it's my path through life, right? It's through that resistance that shapes me into the person that I'm going to become on the other side.
Cool. And then any recommended readings or teachings to search to sort of get a better understanding of that?
For sure. I think a book you suggested to me, The Obstacle is the Way,
Yeah.
Ryan Holiday.
Amazing.
Outstanding book. I think Stoicism is just a great philosophy in general. Another book I really like is The War of Art as well.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Steven Pressfield.
Stephen Pressfield, yeah. Really, really great book. He talks about the resistance. He gets into the philosophical and spiritual principles around that as well. And I really enjoyed that. Those would probably be the two main ones that I think I would recommend. If you're looking to actually reading through autobiographies as well, I have found to be really beneficial as well, because we seem to think that people just get this overnight success as a result of nothing, right? And then you read someone's autobiography and it's like failure. They're down, and then they went back up, and then they went down even lower.
Somebody dies, and
so
like it just goes
it's just
on.
one thing after
It's
another,
insane.
right? So I find autobiography so inspiring, because it's like, wow, like I thought that person was just like lucky, but they went through like so much shit to get to where they are, you know? And it's like, if that's the level that I want to operate from, I probably have to go through the same amount of shit or more, right? So autobiographies of people that you look up to, I think is a great place to look at as well.
Great. What's the favorite?
Honestly, I like to read books that compound a whole bunch of autobiographies together. A recent book that I just read is called Mastery by Robert Greene, and he has essentially like summarizations of 15 to 20 different people who are masters in their given field. And he goes through kind of their autobiography of how they got to being a master in their field. And that taught me a lot about like looking at the Benjamin Franklins.
That's an incredible story.
Oh, it's crazy. It's crazy to think about. Like, again, someone who I'm just like, oh, you know, he was just a smart guy.
Just Benjamin Franklin.
Just
You
Benjamin
just
Franklin.
know him as Benjamin Franklin. It was like,
Yeah, and even like Albert Einstein, right? People like put him on this pedestal, like, oh, he was just like, he was some genius, like I'll never be able to achieve that. But that dude sucked at school, right? He was just really good at abstract
he was
thinking.
at a post office as well, didn't he?
He worked, that's where he generated his theory of relativity. He's working at a post office, making like no money, right? And people don't even think. I know I didn't think about that, right? So it's like, wow, these people's stories are like so empowering, you know?
So, thanks, man. I think we can wrap it up there. I know you got to go, so
Cool. Thank you. Awesome, bro.
always a pleasure.